They say when you're older, time moves slower. I disagree. It doesn't slow down. It just gets quieter. The days don't crawl, they just drift. Then if no one says your name, if no one looks up when you enter a room, you start to feel like maybe you're drifting too. My name is Margaret Turner. Most folks call me Maggie. I'm 74 years old, and I used to believe family meant forever. Not in a fairy tale way. I wasn't naive, but in the kind of way you believe that blood, effort, and sacrifice matter. That if you give enough, love enough, show up enough, it'll be returned. I don't believe that anymore. It started on a Tuesday. Funny how the worst things rarely begin on big days. Not holidays or birthdays. No storm clouds in the sky. Just a Tuesday. I was baking banana muffins. Not for myself, mind you. I rarely cooked for just me anymore. No, these were for Lily, my 6-year-old granddaughter. She liked them warm with the tiniest bit of cinnamon on top. She used to say it tasted like hugs. I remember the timer beeping, the smell filling the kitchen. I remember setting them out to cool, arranging the little paper liners just so. And then I remember hearing my daughter Rachel's voice, low, hurried, almost annoyed, coming from the hallway. She was on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen, but the hallway echoed and her voice carried. "She's fine," Rachel said. A pause. "No, not the nanny. My mom." "Yeah, she's still here. Basically a live-in babysitter at this point." I don't remember what else she said. The word babysitter just sat there. It hung in the air like smoke, thick and invisible, until it settled into the lining of my chest. I wasn't a babysitter. I was her mother. I raised her. I held her hand when she broke her arm falling off the monkey bars. I stayed up with her all night when she had her first heartbreak, made her tea with too much sugar and whispered, "You'll be okay," even when I wasn't sure she would be. I walked her down the aisle after her father died. I was not a babysitter. But that's what she saw now. That's what I had become. It wasn't always like this. When Lily was born, Rachel and her husband Dan had been overwhelmed. First-time parents, both working high-stress jobs. They were drowning. Rachel called me in tears. Said they needed help just for a couple weeks, until they found their footing. That was 15 months ago. They have a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. Modern farmhouse, Rachel calls it, though the only farm thing about it is the ceramic chicken by the stove. When I moved in, I took the smallest bedroom. I didn't want to be in the way. I brought a suitcase, some photo albums, and a quilt Mark and I bought on our honeymoon. The plan was temporary. Help with Lily's drop-offs, cook a little, keep the house running until they caught their breath. But weeks turned into months, and somewhere along the way I stopped being a guest and became something else. Not family, not quite a burden either, just background. Rachel worked from home, holed up in her office most days, headset on, barely glancing up as I passed with laundry or lunch. Dan left early, came home late. Lily grew taller, smarter, sweeter, but I was the one teaching her how to tie her shoes, making her lunchbox notes, brushing her hair after baths. I was the one doing the mothering. But I wasn't her mother anymore. That Tuesday night, I said nothing. I served dinner, cleared the plates, wiped the counter twice. Rachel didn't thank me. Dan didn't notice the muffins. Lily asked me to read her a story before bed, and I did. My voice steady even as my hands trembled. After she was asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the ceramic lamp. It flickered slightly, like it wasn't sure it wanted to keep shining. I knew the feeling. The next morning I tried to let it go. We all say things in passing. Maybe Rachel didn't mean it. Maybe it was easier to call me the babysitter than explain to whoever she was talking to that she still needed her 74-year-old mother to run her life. But then more things started standing out. Little details I'd ignored for months, like how they never introduced me to their friends. I'd be in the kitchen during dinner parties, quietly cleaning dishes, and no one would ask who I was. No one would ask me to join. They stopped printing photos with me in them. The last family photo in the living room was from Lily's 2nd birthday, and I had taken it, not been in it. And every time Rachel referred to me in public, she used words like our helper or grandma's just here to help out. Like I was a phase they were waiting to outgrow. I didn't say anything, not yet. But something had shifted. Not just in how they saw me, in how I saw myself. I began watching my movements like a visitor. I made a point to clean only after they'd left. I stopped putting my name on the grocery list. I ate dinner after them, alone at the island, and told myself I preferred the quiet. I stopped leaving little notes in Lily's lunch. I wasn't sure they were wanted anymore. The final straw came 3 days later. I was picking Lily up from her art class, a little weekend program at the rec center. The teacher, a young woman with bright red glasses, looked surprised to see me. "Oh, you must be the sitter," she said with a smile. "Dan said someone would be coming." I opened my mouth to correct her, but nothing came out. I just nodded and took Lily's hand. On the way home, she showed me a drawing she made. It was a house with 3 people in front: a tall man, a woman with long blonde hair, and a little girl. I asked her who they were. "Daddy, Mommy, and me," she said brightly. There was no old woman with gray curls and a pink cardigan. There wasn't even a dog, and they didn't have one. I didn't cry, not then. I just smiled, said it was beautiful, and taped it to the fridge when we got home behind a grocery list. Then I went upstairs, sat on the bed again, and turned off the lamp. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was just gone, somewhere between useful and invisible. And that's when the thought came, soft but clear. What if I left? Not as a threat, not to prove a point, just quietly, the same way I'd arrived. No door slamming, no shouting, just a mother stepping back. I'd spent my whole life showing up. Now I wondered what would happen if I stopped. That night, I opened the closet and pulled down the suitcase I'd brought with me a year and a half ago. It still had the original luggage tag. I unzipped it, empty, still smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, and I thought to myself, it's time. But I didn't pack yet, not right away. First, I needed to remember who I was outside of this house, outside of being a helper, a quiet, unpaid placeholder in someone else's life. I needed to find the woman who raised a daughter, who stood alone after her husband died and built a life anyway, who once dreamed of buying a small white cottage near the water and reading library books all day. I needed to remember me, because I wasn't just here to help. I was Margaret Turner, and I was about to reclaim my name. I didn't pack right away. The suitcase sat open at the foot of the bed like a question I hadn't answered yet. I moved around it in the mornings, stepped past it at night, never touching it, but never putting it away either. I needed it there, like a bookmark in a chapter I wasn't sure I wanted to finish. Some days I thought about zipping it shut and carrying it down the stairs. Other days, I told myself I was being dramatic, that maybe I was tired. Maybe I was mishearing things. Maybe I'd just been too quiet for too long, and had started reading into every silence. But then I'd hear Rachel laugh in another room, and wonder when that laugh stopped including me. I didn't always feel like this. There was a time Rachel needed me. I mean, really needed me. After Mark died, it was just the 2 of us. She was 16, wild-eyed and silent, walking through the house like it was a museum filled with things too sacred to touch. I'd find her curled up in the hallway outside our bedroom, just sitting there, listening to the emptiness. I didn't know how to help her then. Not at first, but I showed up every day, packed her lunch even when she refused to eat, drove her to school, even when she slammed the door without saying goodbye. I bought her tampons without making it weird. I sat on the floor outside her room while she played the same sad song on repeat for months. When she finally came out, she was different, quieter, sharper around the edges. But she moved forward. She finished high school, got into college. Met Dan in sophomore year. He was polite when he shook my hand the first time. Too polite, like he was trying out the role of son-in-law before the audition had even started. I told Rachel once that he reminded me of a news anchor. Handsome, confident, and always smiling at the wrong time. She laughed, said I was old-fashioned. Maybe I was. When she got pregnant with Lily, she was terrified. She called me crying, said she didn't think she could do it. Not without someone showing her how. So I drove 5 hours that night. Showed up with an overnight bag and a Tupperware of lasagna. I stayed 3 weeks, cooked, cleaned, coached her through contractions, and held her hand during the epidural. When Lily came, Dan was all nerves and noise, pacing the room like he was trying to memorize a speech. I just stood still and held that babe. She looked at me like she knew I'd already memorized everything that mattered. That was 6 years ago. When I moved in to help just for a while, I thought I was doing what any mother would. I didn't keep score. I didn't ask for rent. I didn't ask for anything really. And now I couldn't even ask for space in a photograph. I started noticing patterns, not new ones. Just ones I had ignored for too long. Dan always called me Mags, a name I never liked. Rachel never corrected him. Lily had started copying Rachel's tone. When I reminded her to say please, she rolled her eyes, a perfect imitation of her mother. One night, Rachel asked me not to sit at the dinner table because they were having a family meeting about Lily's school. She said it kindly, casually, as if asking me to step aside wasn't the same thing as stepping out. I took my plate into the laundry room and ate sitting on a stool beside the dryer. It hummed beneath me like a heartbeat out of rhythm. My fork clinked against the dish, the sound louder than it should have been in such a small space. That's when I started writing letters. Not to Rachel, and not to Dan, to Lily. I kept them in a small box under my bed, tucked inside envelopes that smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. I wrote about the time she said banana muffins tasted like hugs, about how she used to run down the hallway just to leap into my arms, about the way she laughed full-bodied, head back, eyes scrunched, the kind of laugh that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. I didn't know if I'd ever give them to her, but I needed to remember that I was here, that I existed, that I mattered once, if only to a 6-year-old who still asked for bedtime stories and held my pinky finger when she was tired. One evening, Lily came into my room, holding a picture book. "Will you read to me?" she asked. I hesitated. Rachel had started asking me not to read to her at bedtime anymore. Said it was confusing. Said Lily needed to get used to Dan doing it. But Lily had come to me, so I said yes. We curled up on the bed, the quilt tucked around our legs. I read slowly, my voice soft, letting the words roll like waves. Halfway through, Lily laid her head on my arm and closed her eyes. I paused. Her small breath tickled the fabric of my cardigan. Her fingers curled around my sleeve like she used to when she was a toddler. She didn't say, "I love you." She didn't have to. That night, Rachel knocked on my door after Lily was asleep. "I thought I asked you not to read to her," she said. Her voice wasn't sharp, but it was cold. I opened my mouth to respond, but she was already turning away. "She needs boundaries," she added. "She's getting too attached. Too attached. To me, her grandmother, her second mother, her unpaid cook, cleaner, driver, Therapist. Too attached. I closed the door gently behind her, then leaned against it for a long while. I could still hear her walking away. Slow, deliberate steps on the hallway floor I once helped install. That night, I took the suitcase off the floor and placed it on the bed. I opened the dresser and pulled out a few sweaters. I folded each one carefully, like they mattered. Because they did. Because I did. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew I was going. The next morning I left early. I told Rachel I was going to the pharmacy. She didn't look up from her laptop. Dan was already gone. I drove to the other side of town to a place I hadn't visited in years. The air was crisp, spring still clinging to the trees like it was afraid to let go. There, past the rusted mailbox and the cracked driveway, stood a little white cottage with a peeling porch swing and wild violets growing along the edge of the fence. My name was still on the deed. Mark and I bought it decades ago. A fixer-upper, meant for weekend escape. We never finished fixing it. Life got busy. Rachel got older. Mark got sick. But the house was still standing, and so was I. I stepped up onto the porch and felt the wood shift beneath my weight. The key still worked. The door creaked open, and dust motes swirled in the sunlight like tiny dancers waiting to be noticed. Inside it smelled like time, and wood, and memory. I walked through slowly, running my hand along the faded wallpaper, past the crooked bookshelf and the little fireplace that never drew quite right. Everything was still here. The kettle, the chipped mug, a pair of gardening gloves on the windowsill. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I sat down in the middle of the empty living room, cross-legged on the dusty floor, and closed my eyes. No one talked over me. No one asked for anything. The quiet wasn't empty. It was mine. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to reclaim it. The thing about silence is that you don't notice it all at once. It doesn't drop in like a thunderclap. It seeps in quietly, like fog under a door. That's how it happened with Rachel and Dan. At first I thought we were just tired. Parenting is exhausting, even when you're not the parent anymore. I made excuses for them, for their coldness, their forgetfulness, their constant distractions. I told myself I was being overly sensitive, that I needed to toughen up. But the excuses started cracking. The day I came back from visiting the cottage, I felt different. Nothing had changed physically. I still returned to the same kitchen, wiped down the same countertops, folded the same dish towels. But something inside me had shifted. I moved through the house more quietly than usual. I began observing instead of participating, like I'd become a guest in my own daughter's life. That Saturday, Rachel hosted a small birthday dinner for one of Dan's work friends, a few colleagues and their spouses, all young, polished, well-dressed. I offered to help cook. She declined. "We're doing catering," she said over her shoulder, already typing something on her phone. I asked if she wanted me to stay out of the kitchen. She didn't answer. That night, I stayed upstairs as the doorbell rang, and laughter filled the hallway. I could smell the roasted chicken, the warm focaccia, the clinking of wine glasses. I stayed in my room and read the same paragraph of a book 4 times before I realized I hadn't absorbed a single word. Then I heard it. Someone asked where Lily's grandmother was, and Rachel's voice, too light, too rehearsed, answered, "Oh, Maggie? She's around somewhere. She likes to do her own thing." I closed the book. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Like I was an oddity, a pet that wandered the house too fragile to disturb. She didn't say my mom. She didn't say she lives with us. She didn't say she's family. Just Maggie. Around somewhere. Later that evening, I came downstairs to clean. The guests were gone. Dishes were piled high. The living room was a mess of cocktail napkins, and stained throw pillows. Rachel was in the kitchen, standing at the sink, sipping wine and scrolling on her phone. I started gathering plates. She looked up. "You don't have to do that," she said, but she didn't stop me. She didn't move. I gave her a small smile. "I don't mind. You've been quiet lately," she said, not looking at me. I hesitated, just trying to stay out of the way. She nodded, eyes still on her phone. "Well, thanks for understanding." That was the entire conversation. Thanks for understanding. As if my quietness was a service to her. As if stepping out of the frame was expected. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because of what she said, but because of what I didn't. I'd started to realize something I didn't want to admit. That I had disappeared in plain sight. The next morning, I went to the fridge to grab milk for my coffee. There was a new photo on the door. One of Dan, Rachel, and Lily at the park. A sunny day, matching sweaters. Rachel's hand on Lily's shoulder. Dan leaning in. I wasn't in it. Of course I wasn't in it. I was probably taking the picture. I stood there, hand on the fridge handle, letting the cool air brush against my skin. The milk sat unopened. I stared at that photo for a long time, and then, like something invisible snapping in my chest, I pulled it down, not angrily, just fine. I slipped it into the drawer next to the fridge, beneath the chip clips and expired coupons. Then I made my coffee and went back upstairs. Later that week, Rachel had a new robe delivered. Soft pink, embroidered. I heard her squeal when she opened the package. Dan called out from the living room. "What's that?" She laughed. "My Mother's Day gift." Lauren helped me pick it out. I paused in the hallway. Mother's Day was this weekend. No one had said a word to me. When Sunday came, there was a brunch reservation on the calendar. I overheard Dan reminding Rachel to leave by 10:30 so they wouldn't miss their table. Lily came down in a yellow dress, hair curled. I waited for someone to say, "Are you coming too?" No one did. Rachel passed me in the hallway. "We'll be back around 2, she said. "Lily's excited for pancakes." I nodded. "I'll have lunch ready." She smiled. "That'd be great." The front door closed behind them. I stared at the empty living room for a long time, and then I walked back upstairs and finally opened my suitcase. This time, I began to fill it, not because I was angry, because I was awake. Because even a house that holds your child and grandchild can still feel like someone else's home. I packed slowly, one drawer at a time. Sweaters first, then the quilt. A pair of shoes. The lavender soap Rachel always teased me for liking. I left the photo albums for now. I hadn't decided if I wanted those memories to come with me. I zipped the suitcase halfway. Then I sat down and made a list. What did I need? Not much. I didn't need a big kitchen. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need to explain myself. What I needed was a place where my name meant something, where silence wasn't a punishment, where I didn't have to earn my seat at the table. That night, I looked through the mail and found an envelope addressed to current resident. It was a newsletter from the community center, a gardening club meeting, a book swap, a list of upcoming events. I stared at the paper. Then I took out a pen and circled 3 of them. No one saw me do it. No one asked why, and that somehow made it feel even more mine. The next morning, Rachel asked if I could take Lily to her ballet recital while they went to a friend's engagement party. "Of course," I said. She smiled like it was a favor, not a routine. She handed me a packed bag. "Her hair's done. She'll need help changing backstage." I nodded. Lily clutched my hand as we walked into the auditorium. The stage was small, the seats filled with folding chairs and anxious parents. The kind of place where memories cling to the walls like dust. She twirled in her little tutu and said, "Are you gonna take a picture of me?" "Of course," I smiled. She grinned, missing a front tooth, and ran backstage. The recital began. Kids danced like butterflies and penguins and stars. When Lily came out, I stood. I didn't record the video for Rachel. I recorded it for me. Because I wanted to remember the moment I said yes. Not for anyone else. Not for thanks. Not to be seen as useful, just because I wanted to. After the recital, we got ice cream. We sat on a bench and let it drip onto our hands. Lily giggled and said, I had a sprinkle on my nose. I wiped it off with a napkin and laughed. And in that moment, I knew exactly who I was. Not a sitter. Not a background character. Not a burden. I was Maggie, I was a grandmother, and I was still here. The next time Rachel handed me a calendar with Lily's school events, I smiled and said, You might want to make other arrangements for June. She looked confused. Why? I'll be moving, I said simply. There was silence, long and sharp. She blinked. Wait, what do you mean moving? I've found a place, I said, somewhere quieter. I won't be far. Rachel stared at me, stunned. Then she laughed. Mom, don't be ridiculous. Where would you even go? I smiled and said nothing. Because sometimes the strongest answer isn't a speech. It's a suitcase, half zipped, and a woman who finally remembers her worth. I used to think the breaking point would come with a shout. Maybe a slammed door, a thrown dish, a raised voice cutting through the air like a snapped violin string. But that's not how it happened. It came in the form of a smirk, Dan's to be exact. The night before it happened, I made dinner. Roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, and Lily's favorite, creamed corn with a little extra butter. I'd baked a small apple tart too. The kind Mark used to love, with the cinnamon folded into the crust. I set the table for 5, out of habit, I guess, even though I hadn't sat down with them in weeks. When Rachel and Dan came home, Lily ran in first, still in her soccer uniform, mud on her socks, cheeks flushed. She hugged me. That part never stopped. Not yet. Rachel breezed past me, kissed Lily's head. Didn't say hello. Dan followed, loosening his tie, already complaining about traffic. I made dinner, I said quietly. Rachel paused. Oh, that's nice of you, Mom. I didn't expect a thank you. I hadn't for a long time. What I didn't expect was what came next. Dan walked over, peeked at the table, then turned to Rachel with a chuckle. You know, he said, we should really start paying her. This is basically live-in housekeeping at this point. He said it like a joke. Rachel laughed. Not a big laugh. Just a soft, knowing chuckle. The kind you give when something isn't funny, but still somehow true. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just stood there, my hand still holding the pie server, the tart cooling behind me. The scent of cinnamon had suddenly turned sour. Later that night, I went to my room and closed the door. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even finish folding the laundry. I just sat at the edge of the bed and felt the silence grow around me like ivy. It crawled into the corners, coiled around the lamp, and settled heavy on my chest. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was something worse. I was erased. The next morning, Rachel found me in the kitchen. She poured her coffee, eyes bleary, still in a silk robe. Hey, she said lightly. Dan mentioned you seemed upset last night. Everything okay? I turned to her slowly. Do you think I'm the help? I asked. She blinked. What? Do you think I'm your housekeeper? Babysitter? Someone you hire and forget to thank? Her jaw clenched, just slightly. Mom, she sighed. You're reading into things. It was a joke. Dan was. No, I said. It wasn't a joke. She looked away, then back. I think maybe you're feeling sensitive lately, she said. Maybe you've been isolated too long. This is a stressful season for all of us. You're taking it the wrong way. There it was, the gaslight. That slow, subtle twist of blame, that familiar move where the victim becomes the problem. I cook, I said. I clean, I take Lily to school. I miss doctor's appointments to be here when your schedule changes. And when I speak, you don't hear me. When I stand in a room, you walk past me. Rachel shook her head. That's not fair. No, I said. It's not. She set her mug down too hard. Coffee sloshed. I never asked you to stay forever, she snapped. You just kept staying. You inserted yourself. I didn't force you to do any of this. My heart cracked, but I didn't show it. I stayed because you asked me to, I said. You called me crying. You said you couldn't do it alone. That was years ago. And I stayed. I gave you time. Space, my life. You act like you're some kind of martyr, she hissed. No, I said, voice steady. I'm not a martyr. I'm a mother, and I gave you everything I had. Rachel crossed her arms. If it's so awful being here, then go. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I nodded. I will. Her mouth opened like she didn't expect me to say it, but I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked past her, calm, quiet. Upstairs, I opened the closet and pulled out my Sunday dress, the navy blue one with the white collar, the one I wore when Mark and I signed the mortgage on our first house. I laid it on the bed. Then I sat down and pulled the letters I'd written to Lily from beneath the mattress. There were 11 now, some short, some long, some just single sentences, scribbled on paper that smelled of night and loneliness. I slipped them into a manila envelope and placed it inside my suitcase. That night, I waited until they were asleep. Then I walked downstairs. I stood in the living room and looked around one last time. The shelves I dusted every Thursday. The couch with the rip on the side I sewed by hand. The lamp I bought when Lily had nightmares, because it gave off a soft pink glow. Then I walked into the kitchen and pulled out a stack of index cards. I wrote 3 things. One for Rachel. I love you, but I won't be erased. One for Dan. If you think kindness is weakness, you've never met a woman like me. And one for Lily. I'll always be where love feels warm and safe. You'll find me again when you need to. I placed them on the table. Next to them, I laid the house key, not because I was being dramatic, because I was done. I walked back upstairs, zipped my suitcase, and sat on the edge of the bed until morning. When the sun broke through the curtains, I stood, put on my dress, picked up my bag, and walked out the front door without making a sound. The morning I left, the sky was soft and gray. The kind of overcast that doesn't threaten rain, just rests heavy on your shoulders like a wool blanket. I didn't look back, not at the porch swing I used to wipe down every spring. Not at the kitchen window where I'd watched Lily play, not even at the second-floor bedroom light that was still on. Rachel's, probably. Maybe she was awake, maybe she wasn't. Either way, I didn't expect her to come after me, and she didn't. The cab driver didn't ask many questions, just helped me with the suitcase and turned the heat on low. We drove in silence for a while, past familiar streets and faded billboards, past the grocery store I used to take Lily to, where she once told the cashier I was her best grown-up. I closed my eyes at that memory. It felt like another lifetime. 28 minutes later, we pulled up to the cottage. I paid the fare, dragged my suitcase up the path, and let myself in with the old brass key that still fit like it never left the lock. Inside, everything smelled faintly of dust and pine. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that presses in on you. This quiet felt spacious, clean, like a held breath waiting to be exhaled. The floors creaked as I walked across them. The air was cool, The light from the kitchen window fell in soft stripes across the floor. I set the suitcase down in the middle of the living room and just stood there. No one needed me. No one was waiting for dinner. There were no lunch boxes to pack, no appointments to rearrange, no schedules scribbled on a fridge. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. Not in that moment. I spent the first 2 days cleaning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because it felt good to make something mine again. I wiped down every shelf, washed every dish, shook out the curtains, opened every window, and let the cold air blow the silence clean. On the third day, I found Mark's old flannel jacket in the closet. It still smelled like cedar and faint aftershave. I didn't cry. I just held it for a moment, pressed it to my face and folded it carefully. I hung it by the door, like a promise, like a memory saying, "You're still here." The garden out back was overgrown. Weeds had tangled through the flower beds. The old bird bath was cracked, but there were still signs of life. Tulips pushing up through the soil, stubborn and slow. A vine of something green and eager climbing the fence, looking for sunlight. I spent the next few mornings out there, digging, tending, breathing. I'd forgotten how much I loved the feel of dirt under my nails, of sweat on my back, from something real, not stress, not anxiety, but effort, intention, grounding. I planted 3 rows of marigolds in a patch of herbs: rosemary, basil, lavender. I found an old wind chime in the garage and hung it by the back door. Every time it rang, I felt like the house was sighing. One afternoon, while sweeping the front porch, I saw Carol. She was walking her dog, a golden retriever with a limp. Carol had been a friend of mine years ago, a retired estate lawyer, sharp as a tack, and always 3 steps ahead of anyone in the room. She paused when she saw me, adjusted her sunglasses, and smiled. "Maggie Turner," she said. "Well, I'll be damned." I laughed. First real laugh in weeks. We talked for an hour on the porch. She asked what brought me back. I told her part of the truth, that I needed to be somewhere quieter, that I needed to remember who I was without anyone else defining it. Carol didn't ask for more. She just nodded like she understood more than I said. "I always told you this place would suit you better than theirs," she said, meaning Rachel and Dan. "Too many polished surfaces. You're meant for something with real grain." That night, I opened the manila envelope I'd packed with the letters for Lily. I didn't read them, I just added a new one. "I planted marigolds today. You used to call them sunflowers with short legs. I hope you always say silly things like that. Don't forget me. Even if they do, I'll never forget you." I folded the letter, tucked it into the back, and closed the envelope. The next morning, I walked into town. It's not a big town, just a main street with a library, a bakery, a post office, and a row of shops that all close by 6 p.m. The library caught my eye first. It was small, red brick with ivy growing up one side, and a wooden bench out front that leaned slightly to the left. I stepped inside. The woman at the front desk looked up, smiled. "Can I help you?" "I was just looking," I said. "Take your time," she said. "We don't get many people this early." I wandered the aisles slowly, ran my fingers across spines of books, paused at the biographies, smiled at the worn copy of Anne of Green Gables, Lily's favorite. There was a sign-up sheet on the bulletin board for volunteers. I wrote my name down. Just that. No phone number, no title, just Maggie Turner. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. That afternoon I called the lawyer who helped Mark and me draw up our will. Years ago, I left a message. Said I wanted to revisit some things, update my trust, make sure everything was where it needed to be. Because even though I'd left quietly, I knew one thing. They'd come looking. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually someone would realize that the free labor was gone, and when they did, I needed to be ready, not for war, for peace. My peace. Protected, documented, untouchable. That evening, I made tea. Real tea, loose leaves in a strainer, not the bagged kind Dan used to buy in bulk. I sat on the porch and watched the wind move through the trees. And I thought about my next steps. Not in fear, in clarity, because sometimes walking away isn't running. It's returning to yourself. The lawyer's office still smelled like coffee and lemon-scented furniture polish, just like it had 15 years ago when Mark and I sat in those same stiff leather chairs and signed the first draft of our will. Back then, we didn't know exactly what the future would look like. We just knew we wanted to protect what little we had. Mark used to say, "Better to build the lifeboat before it rains." And Lord, had it rained. Carol came with me. She offered. I didn't ask. She showed up that morning in a gray coat, her cane tucked under one arm like an accessory she didn't want to need. Her hair was silver now, not gray, shiny and pulled back in a tight bun like she meant business. She always did. We sat across from Mr. Delaney, Harold now. He told me I could call him that. He was older than I remembered, with thicker glasses and a cough he tried to hide. "Mrs. Turner," he said, flipping through the thick manila folder on his desk. "It's been a while." "It has," I said. "And it's Maggie now." He smiled at that. "Fair enough." I handed him the original documents Mark and I had prepared, the copies I had pulled from the safe beneath the floorboards in the cottage 2 nights ago. I hadn't looked at them in years. I'd nearly forgotten what they contained. But something in my gut told me to check again. Harold read quietly. Carol sat beside me, her eyes steady, her silence a kind of shield. I didn't have to explain why I was there. I didn't have to talk about Rachel, or Dan, or the cinnamon tart I left on the kitchen counter the day I walked out. She knew. That was the thing about women like us. We didn't need 100 words when 10 would do. After a few minutes, Harold looked up. "Well," he said, "this is very interesting." My hands were folded in my lap. I didn't speak. He cleared his throat and pulled out a different set of papers, older ones, with signatures I half remembered scrawling in a nervous hand. "Do you recall transferring partial ownership of your home, the property Rachel currently lives in, to your daughter?" "I remember signing something," I said. "It was for tax purposes," Mark said. "Something to reduce inheritance issues down the line." "Correct," he nodded. "But what most people don't realize is that unless the title change is fully registered, and the final form is filed with the county, the ownership never fully transfers." Carol leaned forward. "So whose name is on the title now?" Harold smiled slightly. "Yours," I exhaled, not in relief, in validation. All those months of being treated like a ghost in a house I helped pay for. And it was still mine. Harold continued. "You have full legal ownership. If you wanted to reclaim occupancy, revoke permission, or even sell, you could." I shook my head. "I don't want to go back." "No one said you had to," Carol murmured. "But it's good to know where you stand." Harold nodded. "And Maggie, I'd recommend we update your trust. Place all assets under private management. Add provisions for health decisions, access control, and succession." I looked at Carol. She gave a small nod. "Let's do it." We spent the next 2 hours reviewing everything. The house in Rachel's name now firmly back under my control. The cottage, a modest annuity. Mark left me. I'd almost forgotten about that one. A small investment account. Nothing grand, but enough. Enough to live. Enough to choose. Enough to never be someone's unpaid placeholder again. Carol suggested a new clause. Any medical decisions or transfer of authority would require 2 independent physicians and a notarized report. Not a single power of attorney signature, and definitely not one forged over dinner and dry chicken. I signed everything slowly, deliberately, line by line, like I was drawing boundaries in ink, because that's what this was. Not revenge, a reclamation. I didn't want to hurt Rachel. I just didn't want her or anyone to think they could erase me again. When we finished, Harold slid the documents into a thick red folder and handed it to me. "Keep this somewhere safe," he said. I nodded. Then Carol added, "Somewhere they can't find it." I smiled, already ahead of her. That night, back at the cottage, I made a cup of chamomile tea, lit the little ceramic candle on the table, the one shaped like a sunflower Lily had painted in preschool, and sat with the folder in front of me. I didn't read it again. I just ran my fingers over the cover. Then I walked to the kitchen, pulled out a small wooden box I hadn't opened in years, where I kept old letters, birth certificates, and the hospital tag from when Rachel was born, and placed the folder at the bottom. Then I covered it with the quilt square Mark's mother had sewn, shut the lid, and slid it back under the cabinet. It was done. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel smug. I felt still, like a pendulum finally at rest. The next morning, I made toast and honey, opened the front door, and stepped onto the porch. The sun had risen through the trees, casting gold across the yard. The marigolds were blooming, stubborn, bright, defiant. I picked one, just one, and placed it in a small glass jar on the table. Later that day, I got a text from Rachel. "Hey, just realized the garage code isn't working. Did something change?" I didn't respond. 3 hours later, another message. "Can you call me when you get this?" Still, I said nothing. The silence wasn't punishment. It was boundary. Around dinner time, my phone buzzed again. "Mom, we need to talk." I put the phone down, finished my tea, and walked outside to sit by the garden. The wind picked up slightly, and I swear I could hear Mark's voice in the breeze. "You built the lifeboat. Now stay on it." I closed my eyes and smiled, because I wasn't sinking anymore. The invitation came through text, like most things do now. "Can we have dinner? Just the two of us?" No emojis, no punctuation beyond the question mark, just enough uncertainty to signal that Rachel wasn't sure how I'd answer. I didn't reply right away. I let it sit. 3 hours later, another ping. "I know things got off track. I want to clear the air. Please." That word, please, stuck with me. It wasn't a word Rachel used often. Not with me. I typed one word back. Sure. No warmth. No bitterness. Just agreement. That was all I owed her. Carol offered to come with me again. Not inside, just nearby. She said she'd park across the street and keep the motor running. Half kidding, half not. I didn't say no. When I pulled up to the house, their house, not mine anymore, it looked smaller than I remembered. Funny how distance changes the shape of things. The lights were on in the front hallway. Rachel opened the door before I could knock. She wore a soft cardigan, hair pulled back like she was trying to look young again. Or maybe innocent. I couldn't tell. "Hi, Mom," she said. I stepped inside. The scent of roasted vegetables drifted in from the kitchen. There was bread on the table. Real food this time, not just wine and paperwork. We sat. For a few minutes, we talked about nothing. The weather, Lily's school, a neighbor who'd moved away. Her voice trembled slightly, like she was walking across ice and didn't know how thick it was. Then came the pause, the long, inevitable pause where the small talk runs out. Rachel's fingers tapped the side of her water glass. And then she said it. "I'm sorry." I looked at her. She took a breath, then went on. "I was overwhelmed. Dan and we were stretched thin. I said things I shouldn't have, and I let him say worse." She looked at me then. Really looked. "I didn't mean for you to feel unwanted. I didn't speak. Because sometimes silence gives more weight than words ever can." Rachel reached under the table. and pulled out a small folder. Not thick, not the kind used for ambushes. It looked humble, like it didn't want to be there. She slid it across the table. I tore up the old power of attorney papers. She said, "These are different, not legal, just a list of things I want you to know and decide for yourself." I didn't open the folder. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a document of my own, neatly folded, clean edges. I placed it on top of hers. Rachel's eyebrows pulled together. She unfolded it and stared. It was a formal trust execution notice. Full transfer of all assets into a private, irrevocable trust. Signed, dated, witnessed, sealed, everything protected. Everything out of reach. Her eyes scanned the lines quickly, then again slower. I saw her mouth move as she read, as if her brain needed help catching up. She looked up. "I don't understand," she said softly. "I do," I said. "That's what matters." Her face changed then. Not dramatically, just slightly. The way someone's face changes when a door they thought would always be open suddenly closes. "You think I'm after your money?" I didn't answer that, because if she didn't know by now, nothing I said would make a difference. Rachel's hands fell to her lap. "You're really not coming back, are you?" "No," I said. "Not even for Lily?" I paused. "For Lily," I said. "I'll always be somewhere nearby. But not here. Not like this." Rachel's voice tightened. "She misses you. I miss her too. She draws you in pictures still." That nearly broke me. But I held the line, because love does not mean returning to a place where you were erased. "She'll find me when she's ready," I said. "When she can come to me without asking permission." The silence stretched. Rachel looked at me, eyes glossy. "I never meant to make you feel like a guest in your own family." I nodded. "But you did." She swallowed hard. "And now I'm the landlord," I said quietly. "And I'm not evicting anyone, but I am reclaiming the space I gave away." She leaned back slowly, then whispered, "I didn't know you had it in you." I smiled. That was the problem. I stood, folded my hands over the strap of my bag. Rachel didn't stop me. She stood too, slowly, then said something I wasn't expecting. "Would you ever forgive me?" "I already have," I said. She looked surprised. "Then why does it still feel so final?" I paused at the doorway. "Because forgiveness doesn't come with a key." Rachel blinked, then nodded. "I understand." "No," I said gently. "But one day you might." I stepped out onto the porch. The air was sharp with spring wind. Carol was waiting in her car, engine humming softly. I walked down the steps slowly, steady, each footstep deliberate. At the curb, I turned back once. Rachel was still standing at the door. Not crying, not begging, just watching. That was enough. Carol didn't say a word as I climbed in beside her. But when she pulled away, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You didn't shake," she said. "No," I replied. "I didn't. Because when the ground under you has stopped moving, your hands remember stillness." The snow came late that year. Not the kind of storm that rattled fences or iced over branches. Just a gentle, slow falling hush. Like the sky finally exhaled. Like the season had waited until I was ready. I watched it through the kitchen window. One hand wrapped around a mug of tea, the other resting on the table beside a half-finished crossword. The stove ticked softly behind me, the smell of cinnamon and cloves steeping into the quiet. The house had never felt this alive. It wasn't the size of it. It wasn't the paint on the walls or the chipped tiles in the bathroom or even the garden outside, which still held the last stubborn heads of marigold browned and bowing in the frost. It was mine, every creak in the floor, every dent in the wood, every slant in the ceiling. It all belonged to me. And I belonged to none of it. I was just here, free, unobligated, unclaimed. I didn't expect peace to feel like this. I used to think peace would be loud, a chorus of apologies maybe, or a moment when everything broken was put back together. But real peace, I learned, isn't about return. It's about release. It's about finally letting go of the hope that someone else will do right by you and doing it for yourself instead. Rachel didn't call again. Not that week, not the next, but Lily did. One Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Hi, Grandma." Her voice was soft, cautious, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to speak to me. "It's me, it's Lily." I sat down slowly. "Hi, baby. I'm not supposed to call," she whispered. "But I told Mom I needed to for school." I just missed you." I closed my eyes. Tears welled up, but I blinked them back. "I missed you too," I said. "Every single day." "Do you still live in the little white house with the flowers?" "I do." "Do you still have the wind chime?" I smiled. "It sings every time the wind says hello," she giggled. Then after a long pause, she asked, "Can I come visit?" My heart cracked open. "Anytime you want," I said. "The door's always open for you." We talked for 15 more minutes, about school, about the book she was reading, about a drawing she made that she promised to mail me. She didn't say anything about Rachel. I didn't ask. Some things don't need to be named. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long time. Then I went to the box under the sink, pulled out the manila envelope of letters, and added one more. "You found me, just like I knew you would. No matter what anyone says, love always remembers its way home." I sealed it and tucked it back with the others. That weekend, I went to the library. It had become part of my routine. Every Saturday morning, rain or shine, I didn't go for the books anymore. I went for the women. They never asked about Rachel, or Dan, or why I left. They just showed up one by one, with their thermoses and cardigans and eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by small talk. We didn't always speak. Sometimes we just read quietly, side by side, a silent congregation of women who had once been erased and had chosen to reappear. There was June, with her peppermint tea, Margot with her cane she only used near doorways, and Helen, who wore her dead husband's wedding ring on a chain around her neck and smelled like citrus and wood smoke. We called ourselves the Quiet Corner. Someone said it as a joke once, and it stuck. We even claimed the back row of the library garden beds and started planting there together. Basil, tomatoes, sunflowers, whatever we could get to grow. We didn't talk about our children much. When we did, it was in fragments. He meant well. She stopped writing. It just got too heavy. But we always ended those conversations the same way. "I'm still here." It wasn't grief anymore. It was clarity. We weren't waiting to be forgiven, or invited back, or seen. We had seen ourselves, and that was enough. Spring came slowly. The garden began to wake up, stretching green fingers through the thawing soil. I spent mornings on the porch, hands wrapped around warm mugs, watching the breeze play with the wind chime. One morning, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a single drawing, crayon on cardstock, of a little house with a garden, and a stick figure woman, with gray curls, holding a mug beside a wind chime. At the bottom, in big block letters, "This is where Grandma lives. This is where love is." No note, no signature, but I knew. I framed it. It sits on the table by the front window now, beside Mark's flannel, and a tiny ceramic owl Lily once made me for Mother's Day, the one where they forgot I existed. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to shame them. I just needed to stop shrinking, to stop giving so much of myself away that there was nothing left to come home to. And I came home to this, to myself. That night, I baked a cake, just one layer, just for me, vanilla with orange zest. Like Mark liked, no one sang, no one clapped. I lit a single candle and made a wish, not for anyone else, not for things to go back, but for this, to never forget who I am again, to never settle for being background noise, to know deeply that I was never just anything, not just a mother, not just a babysitter, not just a burden. I was Maggie Turner, and I had found my way back to myself. When I blew out the candle, the flame didn't sputter. It surrendered, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt earned.